Hello and welcome. Well, today is a day when Mr. Andy Mountbatten Windsor starts a new life as he's been stripped of his royal titles. And although the press is very excited about the downfall of their least favourite royal, one of the things it does is to raise questions that are much wider than the fate of Prince Andrew himself. It's quite likely that his own fall is going to continue, that things may emerge from his past that have to do with his finances in particular, or perhaps his sexual adventures, that will make him liable to prosecution. He may flee abroad to escape the jurisdiction of this country. But what does that do to the royal family? And what does it do particularly to the model of royal family that we have? Because it's not just enough to say that, to ask questions about whether or not the royal family as it is can survive this. It's actually in some degree of trouble. Prince Charles is not everyone's favourite king. A lot of people haven't forgiven him for the difficulties he had with Diana and the way he behaved. If he'd really wanted to put the country before himself, he wouldn't have married Camilla, however much he was in love with her, um, and in so doing, jeopardized his own moral probity for the role, as he did. So, to some extent, the country has lost a degree of confidence in King Charles. It's lost complete confidence in Andrew. Uh, some degree of affection remains for Princess Anne, but on the other hand, Princess Anne doesn't appear to be in the running to become a replacement queen. But what if the royal family continued a downward spiral so that it actually jeopardized the whole idea of monarchy in the first place? Because the danger then is we're faced with a republic, and republics are very serious businesses. They are, on the whole, not entirely successful. They produce a politicized president. And if you can imagine some of the candidates to be the politicized president of the UK today, from Sadiq Khan to George Galloway, um, and stops in between, the thought of them as our head of state is deeply depressing. So, is there anything we can do beyond just waiting for the present royal family to continue its tumble down out of the affection and respect of members of the country, or be thrown into a highly politicized republic? Well, there is one thing we should at least talk about. The fact is that Catholics now represent between 8 and 10% of this country's population, which as a bloc is really quite significant. And perhaps it's the biggest bloc, discernible bloc there is. The Islamic bloc is rather smaller still, thank goodness, but not for long. The Anglican bloc has disappeared. Um, You can argue this in a number of ways. Of course, you can argue that anyone who's not anything else is actually a member of the Church of England, but that's not really a realistic metric to use. In actual fact, there's something like between 400,000 and 500,000 members of the Church of England who go to church on a Sunday, and that's a tiny percentage of the population. So, if monarchy is a Christian idea, which it is, and you have two constituencies in the country, one considerably bigger than the other, then the monarchy, if it's going to represent the country, might want to represent the biggest constituency, and that constituency is now Catholics. Is there any at all scope for considering a precedent where the country has said, we don't think the present branch of the royal family should remain, we're going to replace it? And the answer is yes. That's exactly what the forebears of the Mountbatten Windsors did, or had done to them in 1688. Parliament said, we don't want the Stuarts anymore. They are too prone to become Catholic. So we're going to replace them with a rather further distant branch of the family and bring them in just because they're Protestant. Well, what if the circumstances are the same today, but in reverse? What if today the people of this country said, we think that the Protestant monarchy has failed us? Most importantly, they've turned their back on Jesus. The unwillingness of King Charles to become defender of the Christian faith has been a running sore for a very long time, and in profound act of disrespect to Christians, he's talked about wanting to be defender of all faiths, which is a form of contradictory relativism we really can't respect at all. But if the family has failed in terms of its Christian credentials, and has failed more widely in terms of its moral credentials, what right do they have to claim the affections of the country, or in a parliamentary monarchy, which is what they are, remain in place? Well, I'm not saying we have the right to call for them to be removed and replaced with the Catholic branch of the succession, but I'm saying isn't it something we should discuss? Shouldn't we talk about it before we find the stock of the present royal family descending so low that monarchy itself is irrecoverably lost to us? Because perhaps the worst of all circumstances, or is it the worst, is a republic. So Catholics should be saying, we want to preserve the monarchy, we don't want a republic, and we think the monarchy that we have has failed us very badly, and the demographics of the country have changed sufficiently for us to want to have this discussed. It should be on the table. Well, it'll be interesting to see whether or not there's any confidence within the Catholic community to come into what I think ought to be their inheritance. And one of the reasons for raising this is not to cause any particular amount of mischief or to be highly imaginative or to do blue sky thinking, but it's because as Christendom eludes our grasp and disappears, we have to do everything we can to regain whatever confidence whilst we're able to. We have the numbers. We have the numbers at the moment. We're able to do this. And it's for that reason that we should give some thought to the presence of the nearly 10 million Catholics in this country and see whether this very significant bloc, who are the inheritors of the real character of where we live. After all, there was 1,000 years of Catholicism here before the 500-year-old Protestant experiment started and, as we've seen, has now failed. That should give us a platform, at least to want to have such discussions and to mark the fact that we're here and that we intend to take responsibility for the reclaiming of Christendom and, above all, for the restitution of a Catholic Christian monarchy and hierarchy in this country in order to begin the renewal that we know needs to take place of the Christian faith.